district who are doing census outreach. Following remarks, we will open it up for Q&A. And after the Q&A, there will be a brief press gaggle where members of the press will be able to pose questions. Before we begin, there are a few points of housekeeping. If you are logged into the Zoom meeting, please use the Q&A feature to submit your questions. Please mention what neighborhood you are from. Alternatively, you can email your questions to aoc.townhall@mail.house.gov or call 718-662-5970. Our staff is also available to support you with any technical difficulties. Our team members will be monitoring the inbox and phone, and we are also live on Facebook, so feel free to visit the Facebook page for the live stream. Closed captioning is being provided by All Hands in Motion. If you click the link in the chat, it will take you to a website where you can view the transcription. If you require Spanish translation, please click the interpretation icon at the bottom of the Zoom screen and choose Spanish to access the Spanish language audio feed. Please know you may also submit your questions in Spanish. Additionally, if you require Mandarin, Cantonese, Arabic, or Bangla translation, you can listen along to the town hall by calling the phone numbers we're dropping into the chat now. This translation is being generously provided by the New York City Census 2020. Now, it is my honor to introduce you to someone who doesn't need any introduction, the representative for New York's 14th Congressional District, Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez.
Hello, everyone. Hello to all of our residents and our community members here in New York 14. Thank you for joining us for our August town hall. And once again, if this is your first time joining us, and I'm very proud to say that we host a town hall once a month for all of our constituents, and our August town hall is no different. Para nuestros miembros de nuestra comunidad que hablan español, por favor, si necesita traducción, haga clic en el botón de interpretation en la parte inferior de la pantalla y seleccione español o Spanish para acceder el audio en español. If you or someone that you know need to access this town hall in Spanish, just click on the button of interpretation right here at the bottom of the Zoom call, and you'll be able to get a live translation of our town hall. También, si tienes una pregunta, puedes someter su pregunta por escrito en español aquí en el chat o el medio de Q&A. If you have a question or you or a loved one have a question in Spanish or any other language, feel free to put it in right here in the chat on Zoom or in the Q&A feature. Si está llamando por teléfono, también puede llamar en el número que está ahí, que fue anunciado. If you want to also call in and listen, you can dial in with the number that was announced earlier. So today I want to make sure that we really dive in. Usually in these town halls, we have something of a theme, and I'm able to kind of dive in a little bit deeper into the policies of a specific area, whether it's healthcare, housing, or some other policy initiative or legislative initiative that we've been pursuing. But I think for today's town hall, given the nature of how unpredictable these times have been and how tenuous these times have been, I want to make sure that we cut back a little bit. I'll do my best to cut back a little bit on my usual remarks, cut straight to the chase, and try to leave a little bit more time in the Q&A for you all so that I can answer and our team can answer any questions that you may have. So the first thing that I want to make sure that we cover is the executive orders that President Trump signed on Friday, because they're quite complicated. The context around them is complicated, and I want to make sure that you all have full information. So the political context for these executive orders, I think it's important for everyone to kind of understand the context in which these executive orders were made. And it was the following. As so many of you know and have experienced, unemployment benefits were on the cusp of expiring and did expire about 1 to 2 weeks ago. And one of the main issues that we have, of course, is that we have a record unemployment crisis on a level that has not been seen in modern American history. The only parallel that we can even consider is the Great Depression in terms of what we are experiencing today. And it's quite shocking to say, but it is not inaccurate to say that even in the Great Depression, we did not see a shock roll out in the same way. And so really, this crisis that we are seeing economically in terms of unemployment and beyond is very unprecedented. Now, what does that mean? About 10 weeks ago, we in the democratically controlled House of Representatives, or even longer than 10 weeks ago, but many months ago, we had passed the HEROES Act, which you may have heard of before or even recently in the news. And what the HEROES Act provided was a continuation of the $600 unemployment benefit that we had established in the CARES Act. We also included in the HEROES Act was a second stimulus payment for every family, 4 families that received it previously as well, so that every family that qualified also received a stimulus check, a second one. And in addition to that, continuing protections on student loans, housing, evictions, mortgages, rent, and so on. And that's just a small slice. It also included things like hazard pay and also provisions that covered ITIN taxpayers. That is immigrants that pay taxes that were left out of the stimulus checks and are often left out of unemployment programs. The HEROES Act also included and expanded the net of people who would be able to get assistance. Now, we in the Democratic House passed this legislation months ago. And what happened in the Senate is that it went to the Republican Senate, where Mitch McConnell essentially sat on this legislation, did not bring it up to a vote, did not debate it, did not try to negotiate around it for months. The Republican Senate leader, Mitch McConnell, just sat and did nothing with respect to COVID relief. And it wasn't until unemployment benefits were set to expire. So again, nothing happened for several months, no negotiations, no parallel bills, etc. Happened for months until the week that unemployment benefits were set to expire. Now, what happened was that because Republicans did not have a plan, and because they had not been negotiating with the legislation that had been passed months prior, there was a sudden rush to the negotiating table, but there were very few, or rather really no demands that Republicans were making aside from cutting unemployment benefits. They wanted to cut it down to, instead of $600 a week, to an additional $200 a week. And generally just essentially taking what we did with CARES and just trying to strip most of it from working families. Now, this was an area where Democrats and Republicans obviously were negotiating back and forth, but frankly, the Trump administration and the Republican Party would not really budge on making these cuts. And so what happened was that instead of trying to hammer out legislation, President Trump decided to turn around and issue several executive orders. Now, what this means for your life is something that I think is really important to communicate. The reason that context is important is because, first and foremost, we do not know if these executive orders are even legal. In fact, it is my position and is the position of many observing these processes that the executive order that President Trump issued on, I believe, Friday or Saturday may very well be illegal. And so they may not even be enacted. Now, there may be a challenge to these executive orders in court, in which case a judge would have to make that final determination. But let's put all of that aside. And even if we assume that these executive orders, which many are actually memoranda, so they are not really as binding, or they are not as binding as they may seem in media and press reporting about it. Even if you assume that it was completely legal for the president to do this, even if you just take everything that he had essentially issued as fact, there are still problems that we're going to have to encounter, which is why I would say that very sadly and very tragically, we cannot necessarily count on these provisions all being kind of enacted. So the first one, but I will walk you through all of them. So the first one is the payroll tax deferral. So in this executive order, the president issued an executive order to defer payroll taxes for workers who make under $104,000. That means the taxes will not be collected, but they will still be due. This is so important for each of you to understand, because according to Trump's executive order, what's going to happen is that they are not going to take Medicare or Social Security payroll taxes that you normally see in your stub, that amount that usually gets taken out. According to this executive order, if you make less than $104,000, those kind of deductions will not be made from your paycheck, but they will still be owed. They will still be due. So I am very concerned because I know that there are going to be people out there who do not know this. I know there are going to be people out there who don't understand it. And then what's going to happen is that at the end of the year, they're going to owe hundreds, if not thousands of dollars in back taxes because of the president's executive order, potentially. And so my first piece of advice is that if this does go into effect, to make sure that you are accounting for the Social Security and Medicare taxes that would normally be taken out of your paycheck. And my first piece of advice on that would be to go to your last pay stub and take a look at how much was taken out of your last paycheck. And you may want to consider socking that away because, it's just absolutely terrible to be hit with a huge lump sum payment that you didn't ask for and that you didn't sign up for. Again, we don't even know if all of these will be legal, but if the administration moves forward with it, you'll know pretty quickly because it'll show up on your pay stub. And so I don't want anyone to be caught by surprise and to essentially be caught with a surprise several $1,000 bill at the end of the year or around tax season because of this executive order. So that's the first one that I'd say. The second one is this idea around extending unemployment aid to $400 a week. So that's $600 that a lot of people were receiving on top of the state unemployment. The idea for this is that that $600 will be cut to $400 and you will continue to receive that general benefit. Now, here's the problem with this, is that even with that $400, this area is, probably the sticking point that is seen as having the most complications with legality. But let's say this goes through, I need to explain to you all the fine print of it. The first problem is that initial $600 that you received in additional unemployment, that $600 came straight from the federal government. We did not put any conditions on the state to administer it. We did not, there were no hoops from the state level, from state governance levels that needed to be met. Essentially what the federal government did was that we gave this money to the states and allowed the state to put the $600 on top of your normal unemployment check. Now, that's not to say that there weren't any hoops that you all experienced as individuals. We all know how many people were cut out from unemployment benefits. We know how horrifying the system has been, with some people waiting months or weeks and weeks and weeks to receive their benefits. This is not to say that there weren't any complications on that end, which there are and continue to be. But what this says is that with the old system, if you were able to get through, you would get the $600 on top. Now, what makes Trump's executive order different is that Trump's executive order with the $400 is only $300 from the federal government, and they require state governments to kick in an extra $100 in order to receive the benefit at all. And so basically what this means is that if your state government does not kick in the extra $100 to meet on, and mind you, this is on top of the state unemployment that you are already going to be paid, then there will be no additional unemployment benefit on top of the state unemployment. Now, why is this so tricky? The reason this is so tricky is that even if you have a state that wants to pay that extra $100, many, if not most states, cannot actually afford to do that, because in the CARES Act, there was zero state and local funding in COVID relief. So because the federal government, so there's a catch-22, the federal government has not given states any real level of strong funding for states and municipalities. And because the federal government did not give money to states, now what the federal government is doing is saying, we need you to give us money, even though we didn't give you any, in order to help meet this unemployment benefit. So again, even if these executive orders, which are very likely illegal, stand, the problem is that most states cannot afford to pitch in that extra $100 per person on top of the hundreds of dollars that they'd be paying in existing unemployment to get that extended benefit. So he's created this situation, but ultimately, a lot of states can't afford to opt into this program at all. And so even if this executive order even if the executive order stays and doesn't get challenged in the court or doesn't get overruled, the odds of people still getting money on top of their unemployment check are quite slim. And this, at its core, as we know, is a huge crisis and problem. And I cannot say anything else other than I am just so frustrated and sorry to each and every one of you, because it's not anyone at this negotiating table that is going to suffer. It's working families in our communities that are going to suffer. Additionally, so I'm sorry to be the bearer of bad news right now on a lot of different levels, but I just need to give it to you all straight so that you can make decisions for your life. And I will also let you know what our plan is moving forward, what's next moving forward. So the third thing that I want to make sure that we cover is that President Trump, the third executive order that he had kind of signed, had some flowery language about evictions and a moratorium on evictions. That language is not really binding. And in fact, it just kind of reiterates many existing statutes and pieces of legislation that have already been encouraged and processed by HUD. And so there are no additional eviction protections from the president's executive order. And so all of these to say is that in these 3 points, it's all a farce. This is phony. It is not going to help our lives, and it's being presented as a political tool. These executive orders are being presented as a political tool so that Republicans and frankly the president can say, look, we did something. because on their face, they have language that talks about these needs, but they don't actually solve any core problems. In fact, they create problems. Like with the payroll tax deferral, now you've created a problem where people think that they have more money in their pocket than they actually do. And this is going to turn around and bite working families in the behind, and it's going to be really bad. So the reason I'm sharing all of this information with you all is because I want you to have this information, the state of affairs right now, so that you have information and are able to plan accordingly as much as you can in your life. Now, the last piece of good news, if we could go back a slide, the last piece of good news is that in the other executive order, federal student loan payments have been deferred until December 31st of 2020. And so that is an executive order that does seem actionable. And I do believe that this is a absolutely positive development. I'm not here to disparage progress where progress is made. Federal student loan payments do appear to be deferred until December 31st of 2020. And so my number one piece of advice is to double check your servicer, because as many of you may or may not know, the federal student loan deferrals were set to expire in September. And so if we did not reach a deal, if you owed money on September 1st, you had to pay it on September 1st. So my number one piece of advice would be to go to your student loan servicer, especially if they are federally backed, and go online and make sure that they address this deferral and confirm with them that they are in fact acting out and administering the federal student loan payment deferral until December 31st. So that is one bright spot in these. The others are things that look good, but in actuality, I cannot tell you in good conscience that this is something that is even going to happen. And if it does happen, I cannot tell you in good conscience that that this will in fact be administered in the way that people think it's going to be administered. So that's just the big thing on that. Again, later on in the Q&A, I'd be happy to field your questions about this. In terms of the state of play right now, Congress, the Trump administration has completely walked away from the negotiating table, but House Democrats do remain at the ready to negotiate at any period of time. And so if the Trump administration and if Mitch McConnell want to actually hammer out a deal with Congress, we are here and we are at the ready, and we are essentially on a 24-hour on-call notice to return and to cast a vote. And I can give you all my commitment today that I will be there for that vote. And if we have legislation, we're going to do everything we can to make sure that we actually get real support that we need, not just kind of gestures. And these executive orders, make no mistake about it, they're a gesture. It's a fig leaf, and they're not actually going to help people. Even if it feels like it might in the short term, like with the payroll tax, it's going to come back to bite us. And so that's that note. Now we can move on to our next slide. And what I want to say is, all of this jockeying is just horrendous. People are playing games with our lives. And I cannot express enough how much of a fundamental failure and breakdown this represents. It really doesn't matter left or right. People are hungry. People are on the brink of eviction. People are unable to pay their bills. People are unable to keep current on their mortgage payments. And not only that, but also people's credit is getting wrecked, so that even if you're able to get on your feet financially, this is going to have very long-term implications. And so you all have my word that we have been introducing one bill after another and rallying support to make sure that you all get the help that you need. But not all of that, I understand, is very little solace when we need help right now, when we needed help yesterday, when we needed help 2 weeks ago when unemployment benefits expired. So I wanted to go over and have this slide up for resources that you all can access for immediate channels of economic relief. So there's a list of public benefits that are available to you all on the top. There is a tenant helpline if you all are concerned about eviction. Again, the governor had extended the eviction moratoriums or deadlines in some circumstances. So he extended that deadline a bit. So there is a little bit of breathing room. But if you are concerned about eviction, call 311 and ask for the tenant helpline. There is free financial counseling, although, that's fine and good, but if you don't have money, I would definitely encourage you to make sure that you're accessing public benefits and making sure that you get the protections that you need. There is a utility shut-off hotline, a health insurance exchange, food and grocery assistance, and workplace safety. And of course, this is just city and state. There are many, many more resources in the form of local mutual aid and as well as a lot of community organizations that are rallying together, many of which that we are supporting right now as well. So make sure, and the other thing I just have to say is you are not alone in this moment. You are not alone. There are so many people, millions of people, over 30 million people are in the same or similar boat. And the fear and the anxiety around this time can be extremely paralyzing. And the only thing that, my piece of advice is that if you can just bring yourself to just, hit that 311 and press send or press, call and just ask for the tenant helpline, there will be people on the other end that can help explore your options with you, especially when it feels so paralyzing right now and it feels like there are no options. So the best thing I can say is to reach out, make sure that you utilize some of these resources. And there are lots of folks that will be able to help you develop an action plan. So let's go to our next slide. The last thing that I want to talk about are some of the recent and very disturbing changes to the U.S. Postal Service. I'm sorry to be the bearer of bad news, everyone. This is a particularly rough town hall because of how difficult things have been for our community. But on top of all of this, we have the existential threats that are being posed to the United States Postal Service. Several months ago, President Trump appointed a partisan postmaster general. And this was an extremely unusual move because usually the postmaster general is a career professional and they are typically a lifelong public servant for the United States Postal Service. And so what happened under President Trump was that he removed that he vacated and replaced the postmaster general. And this postmaster general, this new one, is frankly a donor. He's a donor, I believe, to the right wing and to the president himself. So this is a political appointment, and he also has ties to contracts with private mail carriers. Folks like UPS, FedEx, DHL, those are private mail carriers. And he was, essentially he was tied into that industry. So what the president has essentially done was remove someone where it was typically a nonpartisan position. The postmaster general was kind of a famously neutral position whose job it was to just make sure that the Postal Service did as best a job as it could with the resources that they had, removed it, replaced a nonpartisan position with a partisan Republican and Trump donor, who also has a vested interest in making sure that the Postal Service fails so that so that we can essentially transition to the only option a person having to mail a letter being a private company. And so there is just an enormous amount of incentives that not only makes this appointment corrupt, but also when you layer it on top of the fact that that the president wants to essentially delegitimize mail-in voting, the way that you do that is by dismantling the Postal Service. Now, I know that in our community in particular, we have long struggled with Postal Service because our community has historically been quite under-resourced, and that that those problems have existed, but this will make many of these problems much, much, much worse. And so really what we need to do is just make sure that we protect the Postal Service in this time as much as we can. I won't lie to you all, I am extremely, extremely concerned about what will happen to one of our most beloved public services and agencies between now and November. And it's extremely important that we protect the Postal Service, as imperfect as it may have been in the recent past with our community. It's so important because what our main problems are not that are in that the Postal Service has been under-resourced, and they're also required to prepay pensions in cash for every employee, which is not a requirement of almost any other agency. And so this essentially makes the Postal Service strapped for cash, even though it's a nonsensical rule that was passed way back in 2006. Anyways, moving on. In the good news, can we keep back on the last? So in the good news is that one of the things that we did do that my office was able to execute on was in a bill that recently passed the House. I was able to advocate for the addition of $50 million in additional funds to increase the accessibility of post offices in historical buildings. This is just largely thanks to a lot of the tireless advocacy from our folks in our community here in Jackson Heights specifically. There's been so much action and rallying previous to the current crisis that we have in the Postal Service. There's been a lot of rallying in our community to make sure that the historical Jackson Heights Post Office gets a ramp and gets ADA accessibility retrofits. And I'm happy to say that we were able to pass and include $50 million in additional funding to get projects, to get that project and projects like it done, which I know seems small, relatively small compared to the larger issues that we have with the post office, but I wanted to make sure that was communicated to you all, that we did make good on that promise. And I also voted for the HEROES Act, which includes an additional $50 billion to save the USPS and include infrastructure improvements. So if you are experiencing service issues, you can call our office or look up your local post office. But I would say that very, very sadly and very tragically, the Postal Service is being sabotaged by this administration. They are trying to dismantle it. It is horrifying. And at this point, our greatest recourse is to just try to resist, support the USPS as much as we can, and make sure that, that frankly, we get new political leadership. So with that, we're going to move on to the next major area of today's town hall, which is talking about the census. Another thing that the Trump administration did was that they moved up the census kind of finalizing date to September 30th instead of late October. And that means that the operation to make sure that our community gets the critical resources that we need, not just this year, not just next year, but the census determines our community funding for the next 10 years. So if you have not yet filled out your census, please, please, please do so. You can do it very easily. You can just pull up a tab right now and type in my2020census.gov and fill out your family census form right there. It does not matter if you are undocumented. It does not matter if you live in kind of an unofficial apartment or dwelling. None of that, it doesn't matter if you have a criminal charge. None of these things, doesn't matter if you owe somebody rent. None of these things matter. The census is completely confidential, It is illegal to share any information or have any information leaked from the census. And so I will just toss it off to one of our panelists today, Amit Singh Baga, who is the Deputy Director of the New York City Census effort for 2020.
Thank you so very much, Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez. Thank you so much for your tireless advocacy on behalf of all of us here in Congressional District 14 and New Yorkers and all residents of our entire nation. You truly have been an advocate for so many of the important issues that are impacting our lives every single day, and we really deeply appreciate your leadership. And also thank you for having me join you today. I'm very proud to be a resident of New York 14 here in Sunnyside, Queens. And I'm also very proud to have been born and raised in another part of the district over in Palm Gardens. So just had to cross the Whitestone Bridge to get here. So I'm here today to talk to you a little bit about the census. As the Congresswoman mentioned, my name is Amit Singh Baga, and I am the Deputy Director of NYC Census 2020, which is also known as the Mayor's Office of the Census. I will start off by just quickly saying that so much of what you heard the Congresswoman discuss today in terms of the benefits we are not receiving, the unemployment benefits we're not receiving, the relief we are not receiving, the ways in which Republicans in Congress and also the Trump administration are essentially blocking money from going into your pockets. That money that is being currently stolen from you is really just a part of the Trump administration's larger plan to continue to steal from and destabilize our communities. And the census, unfortunately, has fallen into that trap. What we've seen today is, as the Congresswoman mentioned, the Trump administration recently decided that the census period was going to be cut by a month, so that the census, which was supposed to be extended until October 31st of this year, is now ending on September 30th, which essentially means for all of those people who have not yet been counted, we now have half as much time to count millions and millions of households across the country and even here in New York City, which really creates an enormous strain on all of those people who have this very solemn responsibility to make sure that every 10 years, each and every single one of us is counted. And like with so many things, the president would not be attempting to manipulate the census or to mess with the census, frankly, unless it were truly important and unless it was truly important for all of us and all of you and every single one of our communities. The census at its core is essentially about three things: money, power, and respect. The census determines how the federal government spends $1.5 trillion, that's trillion with a T, every single year for schools, hospitals, housing, transportation, infrastructure, health clinics, Medicaid, Head Start, HIV prevention programs, children's health insurance programs, and so much more. Any program or service you can possibly think of that is provided by city, state, or federal resources is funded by the census. Here in New York City, our public schools receive more than $780 million every single year, just based on census figures. So when we do not respond to the census, we are not showing up in the numbers that Congress and federal agencies are looking at every single year when they make decisions about the dollars and cents that are literally going into your pockets. So it is critical to ensure that we have accesses to the resources that are rightfully guaranteed to us in the Constitution, the resources that we rely on every single day to feed our families, to get to work, to educate our kids, that we fill out the census. Power. There's been so much conversation this year about power and the way in which the Trump administration has been attempting to whittle away at the power that each and every single one of us has, both guaranteed by the Constitution and inherent in our democracy. We have seen more power play out in the streets of our cities, including here in New York City in the last several months, than we have in decades, which is a true demonstration of the power we have as people, as individuals, regardless of our immigration status or our citizenship status or the color of our skin, to really affect change. But that power we have all been demonstrating every single day, that is at great risk if we do not fill out the census. And why is that the case? That is because the census determines the distribution of all 435 seats in the House of Representatives, the lower house of Congress, every 10 years. States that in theory gain in population get more seats. States that in theory lose population lose seats. And when we don't show up in the census figures, that means that the numbers that Congress is looking at next year when they are determining how these seats are going to be allocated across the country, New York is going to lose. And currently, based on our current response rates to the census, we stand to lose not one, but in fact, 2 congressional seats, which means the folks that we have fighting for us every single day in Washington, for our unemployment benefits, to protect the Postal Service, to protect small businesses, to ensure that we have the public goods and services that we need to stay afloat and alive and continue that into the next 10 years, that representation is at stake here for New York City. So if you believe that recovering from COVID-19, recovering from this pandemic, means that we have as much representation as we possibly can in Washington and also in Albany, where critical decisions about New York City's future are made every single day, you need to fill out the census. And lastly, the census at its core is about respect. What the census really is a count of every single person in the United States, where they live. This is a count of every single person, regardless of their immigration status, their citizenship status, the color of their skin, whether they've been here for 4 weeks or 400 years. It does not matter whether you are an owner of a home or a renter. It does not matter whether you live in overcrowded conditions in an illegal basement or whether you own your own home. Every single person is counted in the census. Every single person has a right to be counted in the census, and every single person has an obligation to be counted in the census. Because the census is the very basis of the way in which the federal government makes so many important decisions about the way money and power are distributed and allocated across the country, it is the very basis on which we must demonstrate that we exist. For if we are not counted, it is as if we do not exist. They say that there is strength in numbers, and without showing up in the numbers, we cannot demonstrate strength. We cannot demonstrate that we are here, that we matter, and that the needs and priorities that we have need to be taken into account when decisions about us are made. And so if you do not want decisions about you to be made without you, it is critical that you respond to the census. Right now, we face a crisis here in New York City and across the country when it comes to the census. And I'm going to share a little bit about where we are in terms of our self-response. This year, despite the fact that the census has never been easier to respond to, you can easily respond to it online or over the phone in just a few minutes, we're behind and we have a lot of ground to make up. As of today, New York City has a 55.4% response rate. It's gone up a little bit since the slide was designed. And in New York 14, it's just about 45%. This means that as of right now, if we don't get these numbers up, New York City and the district that we live in, we're going to be losing out on 50% of the money, power, and respect that are rightfully guaranteed to us in the Constitution. So we have to do everything we possibly can in our power to get that money up. We need every single one of you to respond to the census, and we need every single one of you to talk to your friends, your family members, your coworkers, anyone that you're ever on a Zoom call with, someone that you run into at the grocery store, even if you're at the pharmacy or if you're seeking healthcare. Anyone you talk to, you need to ask them, have you taken the 5 minutes that it takes to fill out the census? Have you taken the 5 minutes that it takes to secure the next 10 years of our future? And why is it important? Because you count, we count, and every single one of us here in New York City counts. Let's talk about just how easy it is to respond to the census. The 2020 census is easy, it's safe, and it's completely confidential. The census is just 10 simple questions that can be answered in just under 10 minutes, very easily online or by phone. Online, you can visit my2020census.gov. That's my2020census.gov. We'll put the link in the chat, and you can answer the questions in just a couple of minutes. You can also call 844-330-2020, 844-330-2020 to answer the census in English over the phone. You can also answer the census in 12 additional languages. Each of those languages has its own phone number. You can look up those phone numbers at nyc.gov/census. We'll also put that information in the chat for you. The census is also completely safe. As the Congresswoman mentioned, the census has absolutely no questions about immigration, citizenship, criminal history, income, or anything of the sort. The census will never ask you for your social security number, your banking information, or what your political affiliation is. So anything you might have heard about the census being intrusive, or it being a long form, or it asking you many private personal questions about your life, it's simply not true. It's just a few simple questions about your name, your age, how many people live in your household, a few questions about race and ethnicity, and you're essentially done. Lastly, and this is very important to remember, especially at a time like now, the census is actually protected by the strongest federal privacy law that exists on the books. It's called Title 13 if you want to look it up. Title 13 is crystal clear. There is not a single response that you can give to the census that can be shared with anyone. Anyone means anyone. That includes the FBI, it includes the CIA, it includes ICE, USCIS, the Department of Homeland Security, the Department of State, the NYPD, any law enforcement agency anywhere in the country. It even includes the state or city of New York, or, and this is very important for a lot of folks living in New York 14, your landlord. We know that there are a lot of landlords out there, homeowners, who perhaps have illegal basements that they've rented out to renters. We also know that there are thousands of our fellow district residents who are living in illegal basements as a result of New York City's housing crisis. We want to say to you very clearly and loudly, the census is completely safe for you to participate in, and it applies to you as well. Your answers cannot be shared with anyone at any time. So we encourage every single one of you to participate in the census because it is the basis for our future. Next slide, please. We'll close by talking a little bit about why the census is an emergency right now. I've been going out, our team has been going out every single day for the last several months, talking to New Yorkers about the census and even helping New Yorkers fill it out. And we hear from folks all the time. Well, the census, that's something that happened months ago. I don't think I can respond anymore. It's too late. Or we'll hear, the census, that's like voting. I'll take care of it in November. Or we'll hear, the census, that's not for me. We're here to tell you all of that is patently false. The census is happening right now. It's still happening. It's not too late to respond, but we don't have that much more time. There is a reason that President Trump cut the census short by an entire month. And it's because he does not want you, he does not want me, he does not want people who look like us, who live in New York 14, who live in New York City to be counted. And why is that? It is because the census is the basis of the money, power, and respect that we can all obtain when we are counted and only if we are counted for the next 10 years. So make sure that we do not allow President Trump's blatant attempt to force an undercount of Black, brown, and immigrant communities across the United States to scare you into not being counted. Please remember, if you choose not to go online or call to complete the census, the United States Census Bureau, which is a federal agency, has its door knockers out in the streets as of this past week, knocking on all of those doors that have not yet responded. That those 45% of New York City households that have not yet responded to the census, you're gonna get a knock on your door very soon if you haven't already. Please do talk to the census taker if they come to your door, but if you want to avoid a knock on your door, please go online and fill out the census and you will not be getting a visit. The best way to fight back against the president is simply to respond. my2020census.gov. Thank you so much, and thank you so much to Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez and your entire team. I will now be pleased to introduce some of our census community partners. These are incredible leaders and organizers who have been working day in and day out here in our communities in Queens. They've been working despite the incredible pandemic of COVID, the unprecedented challenges that have hit our communities that we are facing. And it has truly been an honor and a pleasure to work with them and serve alongside them. I'll quickly read their names and I'll turn it back over to the Congresswoman's team to take it from there. We have Yangla from Adhikar, which is an incredible organization that fights for the rights of the Nepali community here in Queens. We have Perla Silva from Make the Road New York, New York City's largest, most successful, and most incredible immigrant and workers' rights organization. And we have my friend and my colleague, Japrit Singh from Chaya, which has been on the front lines of fighting for empowerment and mobilization of South Asian and Indo-Caribbean communities here in New York City. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Amit. I guess we can give our community partners who are so valued by our office and our community a chance to introduce themselves. First, we can start off with Yangla from Adhikar.
Hi everyone, my name is Yangla and I am the census organizer at Adhikar. Adhikar Meeting Rights is the only women-led community and worker center servicing the Nepali-speaking immigrant and refugee community. The census is very important so that we get our voices heard, but it's especially important for the Nepali-speaking and Tibetan community that Adhikar services because there is not enough data out there on our community, which is why we are lacking in resources, especially regarding language access. We don't have enough interpreters in courts or hospitals, and access to services in Nepali and Tibetan are very limited. Our focus when Adhikar does do our outreach has been on educating our people first about why the census is important, because our community is new and growing rapidly, but also because the concept of a census is very new to the refugee-speaking community that we service. Adhikar has so far helped complete over 5,000 census applications and reached over 4 million individuals through our engagement with national media outlets. We know for sure there are more than 5,000 Nepali-speaking and Tibetan people in our district. And so we held various events last week. We had a census week focusing on different parts of our district, Jackson Heights, Woodside, East Elmhurst, as well as Brooklyn, focusing on the undercounted neighborhoods, where we were able to help over 500 people complete the census last week. I hope everyone makes sure they're counted in the 2020 census. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Yangla. Next, we have Perla Silva from Make the Road.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, Perla Silva here from Make the Road New York. As we had mentioned earlier, Make the Road New York is a great organization. It's one of the largest grassroots organization of immigrants and working class people of color in New York City. Um, Make the Road New York has worked so hard from the beginning of the census. We focus on the census because we know how important it was, and we want to make sure that our whole community members are being heard. And we have been fortunate enough to reach out to and over 100,000 community members and making sure that they know why it is important for the census, for them to participate in the census. And we have been very successful on spreading the word. And everything has transitioned from like just explaining why or what the census is to now like you saw the results, because in 2010 we had such a low and a very low participation from our community members that now they see the results of when the pandemic hit us. We use that perfect example as we needed food pantries, we needed hospitals, doctors, medicine, so many equipment, and we didn't have that. We were in such a critical condition, and we see that now because we were not counted in 2010. They didn't know how many beds they needed. They saw the crisis, and now people are really listening to us, and it's very important they understand why they need to be counted. Um, thank you.
Thank you so much, Perla. And last but certainly not least, we have Jagpreet Singh from Chaya.
Hey everybody, thank you for having us on. My name is Jagpreet Singh. I'm the lead organizer with Chaya CDC. We work with South Asian and Indo-Caribbean communities around housing stability, economic well-being, but most importantly, to build power. We've been working on census issues since 2008, and it's definitely one of the most important things we do every decade. Unfortunately, our community is constantly undercounted and underrepresented, and we see the impacts of that, right? In 2010, the South Asian community and Indo-Caribbean communities in Queens and all of New York City had some of the lowest counts. And these are still the communities that, even though there was a storm last week, are still out of power to this day, still see the infrastructure trees down and all these things that we don't have the infrastructural funding for. We still have overcrowded schools. We still don't have our languages on the ballot. We don't have our languages even on the census, which makes it so much harder to get our communities to really fill this out and do something about it. Our votes are cracked or packed depending on what district you're in. And all these impacts are really bogging our communities down, which is why we're out there. We are out in the streets 5 to 6 times a week, ensuring that our communities are filling out the census. We're out there doing it in language. And unfortunately, we still have to do a lot of the hard work. The census tract of the Gurdwara I go to that I pray at is still at 37% in Richmond Hill, while nationwide we're seeing 60%, which is why it's so important that organizations like ours and others who are trusted, who the community relies on, are out there ensuring that our community is filling out the census and seeing it from familiar faces instead of institutional faces. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And next we will move on to our Q&A portion of the town hall with the Congresswoman and our panelists. As mentioned earlier, constituents signed on via the Zoom platform may use the Q&A feature to submit your questions, and our team will be assisting with answering questions. So you can also write your question in Spanish. Also, a reminder to the members of the press that after the Q&A, there will be a press gaggle where members of the press will be able to pose questions. To begin our Q&A, we have a question for the panelists regarding the census. The question is, how can we help bring the percentage for the census up in our district? Is there anything that constituents can do with so little time potentially remaining?
Sorry, I was muted. I think one of the most effective things that any one of us can do is truly ask your friends and ask your family if they have filled out the census, and if they haven't, to help them fill it out or fill it out with them if you're able. It's so common for someone to have not filled out the census. Clearly in our community, the majority of people have not yet filled out their census. We are in the 40s. And so there's a very high likelihood that if you ask somebody if they filled out their census that they haven't. And so I think the most effective thing that you can do as an individual person is just talk to your mother, your father, your grandparents, your neighbors, bring it up and ask if they filled it out. It is the single most effective thing that you can do as an everyday person. And if they fill it out, have them ask their friends, whether it's, you know, in their local community gatherings or in your phone calls with them. Especially in a time when we are social distancing, it's the one-on-one relationships that we have. To have that little piece of accountability is so important. So that's my number one recommendation.
Great, thank you so much. And the next question is for the Congresswoman, what kind of legislation did you put forth in January to combat COVID-19 when it became publicly known?
Thanks for this question. It's an excellent one. You know, I believe that when COVID became widely, or when we started to realize that COVID was becoming a problem in January, you know, I think that there were areas where the transmission vectors were not fully known. So this issue started really coming into play in over the course of February. I would say that it really started becoming a deeper and larger issue internationally. And we started preparing for our response. And so while we did not drop legislation specifically in the month of January, and some of you may have known that the Senate received a confidential briefing on this, the House did not. The House caucus did not, but if that's why you're asking January specifically. But in terms of the legislation that we introduced, or that we have either introduced or co-sponsored, which is kind of like supporting and bringing to the floor, we've done quite a bit. We have done actions on paycheck, you know, for example, the Paycheck Guarantee Act, which goes a step further from unemployment and tries to prevent unemployment to begin with by guaranteeing the payrolls of small businesses. We have introduced eviction moratoriums, so rent cancellation and mortgage relief. So we make sure that we're not punishing small landlords or anything like that, but making sure that people still get that runway with rent cancellation and finding a way to make it happen. So we've introduced and we've co-sponsored action on healthcare guarantees as well, and trying to support the idea of opening Medicare to everyone, but especially in this immediate moment, opening Medicare for enrollment from people who are recently unemployed. And we've also co-sponsored legislation giving people recurring universal basic income at the very least during the duration of the pandemic, if we can get a political consensus on that. So around $2,000 a month. And so those are just some of the pieces of legislation that we've introduced around and have supported around COVID, but there's much more. We want to make sure that people's credit reporting gets suspended during this time, so that if you miss a bill, you know, that this doesn't get dinged on you for the next 7 years. We've also introduced and supported many other pieces of legislation to help in the form of economic and health relief.
Thank you, Congresswoman. And the next question is for Amit from the Census. James asks, I was sent a census form that asked me many questions about how many rooms there are in my house. Where do I get internet service from? How much money I get per annum and per month? Was this not the actual census? Have I been defrauded?
Thank you so much for that very important question. So to be very clear, the United States Census that happens this year, which is the count that happens only once every 10 years, is just 10 simple questions. Your name, your address, which is very important, your date of birth, your gender. They ask you questions about race and ethnicity. They ask you whether or not you rent or own your home, and a couple of other simple short questions. There are no questions about income. There are no questions about how many rooms in your house. There are no questions about where you get any of your public services from. It is possible that you have received the American Community Survey, which is a longer form questionnaire that the US Census Bureau does share. But to be clear, that particular questionnaire with those questions is not the census.
Got it. Thank you. And I think, Amit, you can take this question as well. Evelyn asks, what can you do if you can't find your original census form? The follow-ups don't have the invite number.
I'm so glad you asked this question, Evelyn, and I am sorry that I did not proactively address this in my remarks earlier. So in order to complete the census, you do not need any piece of mail. You do not need a postcard. You do not need a letter. You do not need a special code whatsoever. All you need is your name and your address. If you go to my2020census.gov, my2020 census.gov, you will see that it asks you to enter a code, but just underneath that, it says, don't have a code, click here. All you have to do is click that link, and the next prompt will ask you to put in your address, and that's all you need. So please don't worry if you can't find your original form or your postcard or you don't have a code, none of that is needed, just your address.
Thank you so much, Amit. The next question is for Perla from Make the Road New York. Someone asked, why would or should a person who is here, quote, undocumented, be counted in the census?
Thank you for that question. It's a really good question because we do get that often, and especially in our organization, a lot of the people are afraid. And of course, because of everything we hear on the news, they're so confused. We tell them one thing, but the news tells you another. But it is very important because from the beginning, they will never ask you for your legal status. And this is a perfect opportunity for you to be counted. You may not be counted in other government surveys, or you're not allowed to participate in other government issues, but this is our opportunity. This is our time that we can be seen, and you don't have to know my legal status. So it is perfectly safe for you to trust the census and just fill out the census. Yes.
Thank you so much, Perla. And the next question is for the Congresswoman. Is it true that if New York is undercounted, that it is possible that the Congresswoman's district could be cut?
Well, one thing that is important to communicate is that, just as what was communicated earlier, that so many of our resources are determined by how many people fill out the census. Our political representation is also determined by the census. And so for those of you who don't know, in the House, we are supposed to have about one member for every roughly 700,000 people. And so if you don't have 700,000 people, then you lose a representative. And in New York, if you don't fill out your census, and if we lose, if our kind of reporting goes down, then we lose a seat or one or more seats in Congress for the next 10 years. And so, this is really important for us to determine. And now whether any one seat is on the chopping block or not is kind of subject to the politics of Albany. But there are folks that are commonly, one of the common estimations that are out there is that the state of New York is going to lose 2 seats in Congress, which means that there are 2 members of Congress from the state of New York that may not be here, may not be able to represent the state of New York. Now, that's also to say that many districts also get redrawn. So you may have the same member just representing a very different community. That is something that also happens. So to kind of answer your question, could it happen? Yes. If our community does not fill out our census, especially if we are far lower than where we were 10 years ago, it's entirely possible that New York's 14th congressional district, while it may exist on paper, it may look very different, or it may be redrawn in very different ways. And this is a very tangible consequence of how political representation works. And so when we talk about the importance of the census, it's to make sure that our schools get funded. It's to make sure that our infrastructure gets invested in. It's to make sure that we can build enough affordable, actually affordable and public housing to house the amount of people in a certain income bracket in our community, to house working class people. And it also goes to political representation. So I can tell you that I have no intention of going anywhere, but also we need to make sure that we fill out our census, because if we do fill out our census, if we do boost our numbers, then we don't have to worry about cutting or making sure that we're reducing representation at all. In fact, if we can overperform in our census than we have in years past, there's always the possibility of adding seats of representation. But that only happens if we actually fill out our census. If we don't, then yes, we will experience cuts in representation, in resources, and just in our general quality of life.
Thank you, Congresswoman. And the next question is to Youngla and Jagpreet combined. I think you guys can tag team this one. But the question is, what can be done by the end of September in such a short timeline to get as many people to respond to the census as possible? How do we get our neighbors, our friends, and people in our community to fill out the census?
I could start off, and then Youngla, if you want to fill in. So, you know, something we've been doing at Chaya is making sure that we're going out to the places where our community is at. Whether it's the Gurdwara every Sunday, where we're getting about 200 to 300 folks to fill out the census, or the temples or the masjids, whether it's the local grocery store, whether it's just the commercial corridor where our folks walk through, the public plazas where they rest at before going to work. All these interactions, all these places where our community is where we need to be in order to ensure that we're getting that message out there. Individually, folks need to make sure that you are calling up your uncles and aunties. You're making sure that people within your family, your networks, are filling out the census as much as they can. I've been tagged in like 7 different Instagram, tag 5 people to fill out the census. And it's, you know, like, I'm not the biggest fan, but it works. It legit works. So like, whatever you can do to ensure that folks are filling out the census is what you need to do. And then make sure you're doing that follow-up as well. Don't just tell them to fill out the census, hit them up the next day to make sure they filled out the census as well.
Yeah, I mean, what Adikar's been doing is we've been partnering with a lot of elected officials with food distributions, and whenever everyone's come, we've made sure to include census flyers, census materials, ask if they filled out the census or not. Throughout the COVID pandemic, it's still occurring, but we also took down member names from our call logs, and we went to homes and delivered masks and hand sanitizers, and also included census materials in that. As for individuals, like Jagpreet said, I think it's really important first to make sure the people around you have filled out the census. So whenever we've called our members, we've also asked them if they can pledge to get 10 more people to sign up. If they can just look at their phone book, I think it takes like 10-15 minutes to just like text 10 other people that they know, to make sure that people around them also know about the importance of census and to get more people to sign up.
Great, thank you so much. And just to go back to Perla for a second, I think you wanted to address the question of why the census form will ask us for our phone numbers when we don't have our codes.
Yes, thank you. I think it's very important because it's a very frequent question, and it's just, it's because we want to, well, the census will always want to make sure that there is not, let's say, 3 Perla Silvas in the same building. And we want to make sure that it's a valid person being represented, and it's not like a repeated information. But just know that, you know, the census will not call you constantly, and then once they have your phone number, they're not going to ask you for any further information. This is not where they're going to ask you for your legal status or credit card information. It's simply to just make sure that there is only one Perla Silva in that building that I addressed to. Thank you.
Thanks, Perla. And the next question is to any of our panelists, whoever feels up for this question. Greetings from Sunnyside. I think I filled out the census online several months ago, but I forget. Is there any way to confirm whether my census response was recorded?
I'm happy to take that question if nobody minds. So there isn't necessarily a way for you to verify whether or not your census response was recorded months ago. However, if you do fill out the census again using all of the same exact information, it will show up on the Census Bureau's backend as a duplicate. And if that happens, they will call you to confirm the information you have submitted one more time. If you confirm for them that yes, you are indeed the same person at that same address, they will simply remove the duplicate entry and the original entry will move forward. And if you hadn't actually done it, then you will have just completed your census.
Great, thank you, Amit. And just a follow-up question, someone asked, is the census still hiring?
I want to just preface this by saying I represent the City of New York, the Mayor's Office. I don't speak for the United States Census Bureau. My understanding is that the United States Census Bureau is no longer hiring. However, if you do want more information on that, I encourage you to visit census.gov.
Thank you so much. And the next question is for the Congresswoman. Can the Congresswoman please address the lack of correct mask usage and social distancing along busy Northern Boulevard in Jackson Heights and East Elmhurst in Queens?
Yes, thank you for bringing this up. You know, I have been receiving so many calls and so many messages from members of our community who are scared and who are really frightened about what they are seeing. You know, there are some areas that have just been packed in the streets where, especially, you know, on Friday and Saturday evenings, where people have, you know, been going out, where they've been attending restaurants and bars, really, really crowding, not wearing masks, or just even if you're just going to the grocery store, not wearing a mask properly. Everyone, this is so incredibly important. You know, we as a city should be proud about how we were able to, with community input and with all of our work and caring for each other as a community, being able to get our caseload under control. But COVID has not gone away and we are still in a pandemic. We have to make sure that we are caring for each other, especially as we start to transition from August into August and from August to September. It's so important that we take care of each other. Please, a mask. I kid you not, I was walking down the street like last week and I saw someone wearing a mask right up here on their head. This does nothing for you. Este no haga nada. Este no hace nada, okay? It cannot be here. It cannot be here. It cannot even be here. Tiene que ser aquí, okay? Your mask needs to be right here. So please put your mask over your nose, over your mouth. This is not just to protect ourselves. This is to protect our elders. This is to protect people in our buildings, in our neighborhoods. And, you know, a lot of people will be really, really surprised to learn how many elders live in your building, how many immunocompromised people may live in your building of all ages. This is not just an issue that's impacting the elderly, as we're seeing. You know, there were times where some of the highest levels of hospitalization and really high levels of hospitalization were coming from people who are relatively young. So don't take the risk. Please take care of yourselves and make sure that you take care of others. Again, we are still in a pandemic. We are learning more about it, right? There are some things that we're learning more about COVID. And one of the things that we are learning more about it is that the transmission is happening less through surfaces, you know, through me touching something and someone else touching that thing, though that kind of transmission should, you know, can happen. But what we're seeing is that the most common form of transmission is through the air, through breathing, which is why wearing a mask is so important. The other thing that we're learning is that asymptomatic people can potentially spread COVID just as much as some symptomatic people can. So even if you're not having symptoms, you know, we've heard for a long time that if you don't have symptoms, you can still spread it. One of the things that we're starting to learn is that even if you don't have symptoms, you may be spreading it just as much as someone who is very sick. And so please make sure that you're wearing a mask, keep washing your hands, keep carrying hand sanitizer, but the mask is one of the most important aspects of this. So please wear a mask. And if you are waiting to go sit down at a restaurant, if you are waiting to go get a drink, keep your mask on until you are seated. We don't want to respond to this issue in a punitive way, but there are already businesses that have had to have their liquor licenses suspended because of how irresponsibly people were acting. So please make sure that you're supporting the small businesses in our community by not putting them in a difficult position and making sure that you're being responsible.
Great, thank you, Congresswoman. And the next question is for you as well. Someone asks, with the president strategically hobbling our democracy by undermining the post office and putting a donor in charge, what can we do to make mail-in voting possible in 11 weeks?
Well, this is the question of the day. The number one thing that I would recommend is that if you are going to pursue a mail-in ballot, and if you know someone that is going to vote by mail, please make sure that they send their ballot on the first day that they can possibly send it, because we know that there are going to be massive slowdowns with the post office. We know that slowdowns in service are already starting to happen. So please don't try to mail your ballot in just 3 or 4 days ahead of time, hoping that it's going to get in on time. We don't know how bad this assault on our postal service is going to get between now and November. And so I believe that the most important thing that you can do is look up if you are going to be voting via mail-in ballot, to vote and to send your ballot the day that you get it. Or even if you're able to print it out online and send it, however your state pursues it. And from our perspective in our community, if you know that you are going to, vote by mail in New York for November, make sure that you apply for your absentee ballot as soon as you possibly can. And once you get it, to mail it back in, because we know even from our primaries, remember a lot of people applied for absentee ballots in their primary elections. They got them extremely late. So please make sure that you send your ballots in very early. And the other thing that we can frankly really do is vote in person. I wish that I had more good news to give you, but frankly, there is an all-out assault on our democracy, and there's an all-out assault on our postal service. And the best thing that we can do is to just try to individually make sure that our vote counts as much as possible, and to render a positive vote in November and a positive outcome in November. Now, the other end of this is what happens after November. And what happens after November is where we're going to have to fully fund the post office. But my opinion, and this is a cause that I've been championing, I believe that we need to expand the postal service to include postal banking, basic banking like check cashing services and other types of services to be allowed to be done at the post office. Is something that I support. But again, all of this is after any considerations of an election. But in the immediate tense and the immediate term, I think that the most important thing to do is to mail out that ballot as early as possible if you are decided on mail-in voting, and if not, to make sure also, if you can, to take the day off or take a half day off of work. In the state of New York, you are actually legally entitled to 3 hours off of work in order to vote. So my recommendation would be to ask for those 3 hours. It cannot be denied to you if you need to vote. It is the state law. And so my recommendation would be to just ask for those 3 hours and try to show up and vote as early as possible, because as we all know, it can be a mess here in the state of New York. Machines can be broken, people can be confused. So even though you're ready to vote in 15 minutes or less, we all know it can be a little bit more complicated. So my recommendations is to get your voting plan together, because it's not going to be easy, even in a blue state like ours, because this pandemic is complicating a lot of logistics.
Thank you so much, Congresswoman. And the next question is for Perla and Jagpreet from a constituent, and they ask, is there any way to help with the census remotely? I'm in Florida after my mother had passed, so I'm not currently in Astoria, but if there's a way to help bring the percentage up, I'd love to contribute.
Let me just say really quick, because I know that Ahmed would have more. That's great. Oh my God, that's like absolutely the best, that we need all the help that we can get. If he would be able to contact us, Make the Road, we would absolutely have to have as much volunteers as we could. And then I'm going to give it to Emmett, because I know he would probably say the same thing. And thank you.
I'll quickly jump in and turn it over back to Jagpreet. One of the easiest ways that you can help get your community counted, or the community you're originally from counted, is to simply sign up for our predictive dialer phone bank. It is really, really simple. All you need is a phone and a computer. We set you up entirely. It could not be easier to use. Go to nyc.gov/census calls. That's nyc.gov/census calls. And you can sign up. In an hour, you can make several phone calls to your fellow New Yorkers or former fellow New Yorkers and talk to them about the importance of the census. We have a script for you. We train you on the dialer. It really is very simple. Even my mother could do it. We encourage you all to sign up and help us increase that count. Jagpreet, I don't know if there's anything you want to add.
No, I mean, I think you answered that perfectly. Please check out nyc.gov/census calls. I actually have a bit of a challenge for you, whoever had asked this question, everybody on this chat, on this town hall right now. I want you to take out your phone right now, look at 5 of your contacts who you think may not have filled out the census, and ask them to fill out the census right now. And then once they say they have, give them the same challenge. We need to make sure that we are continuing to push this message across as much as we can. And that's the only way we're going to get this count up.
Thank you so much. And thank you to our panelists and the Congresswoman for answering those questions. Before we close out the town hall section of this meeting, I just wanted to give all the panelists a chance to give closing remarks.
Thank you so much. Once again, Congresswoman, thank you so much for having me here today to represent the city. Thank you so much to our fellow panelists for all of the incredible work that you've been doing on the ground for more than a year now. I want to quickly just share a couple of quick factual points that I know came up in the Q&A. I will be very brief, I promise you, but hopefully they will be helpful in answering folks' questions. And then I just have, a parting thought to share. The first is, yes, the United States Census Bureau is the federal agency that is responsible for conducting the census that happens once every 10 years. And yes, the census takers or door knockers, or otherwise known as enumerators, are out right now. So you might see them in your community. In fact, you're very likely to see them in your community. You will know who they are because they will have a piece of ID that has a Department of Commerce watermark on it. The Department of Commerce is the massive federal agency within which the Census Bureau is housed. They will also have a bag. They have the sort of laptop bags that have a large Census Bureau logo. So if you see someone like that knocking on your door, it is a census taker and you can speak with them. It's one form per household. I saw a few folks had this question. If someone else in your household, whether it's a partner or a parent or a family member or even a roommate or a housemate, has filled it out and they included you, you are set. You do not need to fill out another form. Again, the best and easiest way to respond to the census is to simply go online, my2020census.gov, or call 844-330-2020, and you can be counted very, very quickly. To sign up to volunteer, nyc.gov/census calls. I also want to just share one very important resource, if the Congresswoman will allow me. The city has just announced a brand new eviction prevention tool. This is really, really important for anyone who might be facing eviction. We were actually the first city in the entire country to provide free legal representation for any tenant, regardless of immigration status, in housing court in New York City. We now have a whole slate of new options for you as well. You go to nyc.gov/tenant resource portal, nyc.gov/tenant resource portal, and you can sign up to get a whole bunch of information. You can actually call and someone will walk you through all of your options. And the last thing I will say, and I speak to my fellow New York residents, New York 14 residents in Corona, in Palm Gardens, in Sunnyside, in Throgs Neck, the census is truly about each and every single one of us. You know, I think someone asked a question about why should someone who's undocumented care to be counted in the census? I think the gentleman's name is Gerardo. Well, here's why. In Corona, where we see there is tremendous overcrowding, 6, 8, 10, 12 people living in a household together, where we saw the most severe impact of COVID anywhere here in New York City, that neighborhood, when it comes time for the city to decide where we are going to build truly affordable housing for every single New Yorker, we need to know where those overcrowded neighborhoods are. And we need to know who is living there regardless of their immigration status, because the city is going to build affordable housing for everyone when the time comes. And so we need folks in Corona to be responding to the census and telling us, yes, we need those resources here. And when a vaccine is finally found, we're going to need to know exactly how many vaccines to deliver to that zip code. And if we do not have a complete count, we're not going to be able to do that. So the census is for you, the census is for me, the census is for all of us. Thank you so much. Bahut bahut shukriya, gracias, thank you.
Hey y'all, again, Jakpreet Singh here with Chaya CDC. I just want to echo my brother Amit's points here about why it's so important, especially if you're undocumented, especially if you're living in informal units like basement housing, like room shares and things along those lines. Oftentimes it's our communities, our people that are scapegoated as reasons for overcrowding, for a bear on the infrastructure, for all of these issues, which honestly and truly are not because you are because you live in the basement. It's because of undercounts in the census. The only thing that puts a strain on our infrastructure is an undercount in the census. The only thing that keeps our schools from being overcrowded is an undercount in the census. We got to make sure we aren't scapegoated. We got to fill out the census in order to do that. Let me just give you some quick numbers real quick. The communities that we work in are Jackson Heights, Elmhurst, but we also work in South Queens. Richmond Hill, for example, and South Ozone Park are both in the 40s. The census tracts in our Punjabi dense neighborhoods in the communities I work in are still in the 30s. The only way we're going to get these numbers up are by working hard and ensuring that we have boots on the ground, ensuring that people are filling out the census, ensuring that we're doing it in a culturally competent way. The fear out there of institutions and institutional supremacy is real within our communities, right? Like, we've seen ICE raids in our communities in South Queens. We've seen Department of Buildings coming in and cracking down on basement apartments, right? We've seen the reasons our communities are justifiably afraid. The only way to reverse that fear is by folks who look like us, who understand the communities, who pray in the same institutions, who buy roti from the same roti shops, are out there and helping folks fill out the census. The time for information or telling people about the census is over. No, we have to go out there and actually fill it out and help people fill it out. We have all these great organizations, elected officials, the Census, New York City Census Bureau here, volunteer, come out and help us do this work because we don't have too much time left. Thank you.
Yeah, you guys did an amazing job. I want to thank our Congresswoman, of course. Thank you for having us all here. Thank you for inviting Make the Road New York. Just want to follow up and just be like, it's super important. Please, yes, one more time, que llenemos el censo. Ya vimos todo lo que pasamos, everything that we went through due to our pandemic, and we are going to need these resources. We're going to need to be counted, and these numbers are going to be very important because how else are we going to recover from the pandemic? How else are we going to build and make sure that our children are okay? We need to make sure that they know how many of us live in a tiny 2-bedroom apartment. mi gente, we always tell you, we have always said, don't open the door, don't open the door. And now this, with the pandemic, it's like, okay, we had stopped knocking the doors, but census is coming around and they're going to start knocking the doors again. It's great that they're going to identify themselves and we're giving this information. But once again, we do not want you to get confused. Siempre les decimos, no abran la puerta, no abran la puerta. And now we're telling you, hey, if you haven't filled out the census, you need to open the door. We don't want that to happen. So just please remember to fill out the census online, the safest way, the quicker the possible, on your phone. Everybody has a smartphone nowadays. It only takes less than 10 minutes. It's literally super quick and easy. And thank you all so much for your time.
Great, thank you so much. And thank you so much to all of our panelists for the work that you and your organizations are doing out in the community with your boots on the ground. And that will conclude our town hall segment of this meeting. So thank you so much to everyone for being here with us tonight. Next, we'll be moving on to the press gaggle section of the meeting. However, if you have any lingering questions, please feel free to stay on. The Congresswoman's staff will be continuing to answer questions during the press gaggle. Also, if you need to get in touch with the Congresswoman's office, you can call us at 202-225-3965 for the Washington, D.C. office, or 718-662-5970 for the district office. Additionally, you can email the Congresswoman and subscribe to her newsletter on the official congressional website, which is www.ocasio-cortez.house.gov. We send out a newsletter each week, and it contains the latest information on COVID-19 relief, events that we're doing for constituents in the district, as well as updates with the Congresswoman's legislative agenda. And it's available in English or Spanish. So before we move on to the press gaggle section, just wanted to give the Congresswoman a minute or so to give closing remarks or share any pertinent information with constituents.
Of course, as always, thank you to everyone who's joined us for our town hall today. We look forward to seeing you at our next town hall, where hopefully we, knock on wood, I'm going to speak it into existence, that we have some relief packages that we have hopefully have passed by then, or at least are on the table to get some real support for you all. Please stay safe. Please take care of one another. Please make sure you're wearing your masks properly. And please fill out your census. Again, I know how many of you are in just such a difficult position, whether it's health-wise, economically, psychologically, just from the stress of everything that's been going on. Please do not hesitate to reach out to our office if you need help, or to reach out to any of the resources that were provided earlier today to get the help that you need. And once again, as always, we're committed to making sure that we get through this together. So thank you all so much. Thank you to all of our panelists who joined us today to help get this critical information out. And have a wonderful day and stay safe.
Great, thank you so much, Congresswoman. And just moving on to the press gaggle portion. So if you're a reporter and you're interested in asking a question, please click the Q&A icon at the bottom of the screen and state your name and outlet in the question field. Reporters who are selected will be unmuted by our admin so they can ask their question to the Congresswoman directly. The first question is from Nicholas Wu, who's with USA Today.
Hi, Congresswoman, can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you.
Great, thank you so much for holding this evening. I had a question, not about the census, but about the vice presidential pick. I know you've been so vocal in talking about trying to bring the Biden campaign to the left. First of all, are you disappointed at all in Harris as a candidate? Had you hoped for someone more progressive? And secondly, had you talked at all with the Biden campaign about selecting a VP?
So this news, as we all know, it broke late today. It actually broke right before I started this town hall, right before we were logging on to do the tech and prep for the town hall. So frankly, I'm still kind of processing it after doing all of this and making sure my constituents have what they need. I think that the vice president, he in Senator Harris, he has picked a vice presidential candidate that complements him very well, rounds out his ticket, and also is aligned with him on quite a few issues. And so I think together they complement one another. As to your question about whether the Biden camp kind of reached out or consulted me or asked me about this decision, the answer is no. This was very much, I believe, Vice President Biden's, decision that is understandably a very personal one.
Thank you.
Great, and it looks like that's our only question for today. So we'll go ahead and wrap, but thank you so much to everyone for joining tonight's town hall. Thank you to the Congresswoman and our panelists again. We really appreciate it, and have a great August and enjoy your month. See you in September.
Thank you, bye-bye.
Thank you.